Hello and welcome to Quiz Time. I'm Jess, and today I have a World War II quiz. So, are you a buff on all things World War II? Well, let's test your skills. Which Japanese naval officer opposed the attack on Pearl Harbor, warning that if we fight the United States, we will win for a year and a half, but after that, I have no expectation of success? It was Admiral Asami Nagano. The Double V campaign during World War II was an initiative by which group? African American civil rights activists, women's suffrage movement, or Jewish resistance fighters? African American civil rights activists. Which country maintained diplomatic relations with both Allies and Axis powers throughout most of World War II, serving as a key intelligence gathering location? Switzerland, Portugal, or Turkey? Turkey. What was the name of the Allied deception operation that used inflatable tanks and dummy aircraft to mislead German intelligence before D-Day? Operation Bodyguard, Operation Fortitude, or Operation Minemeat? Operation Fortitude. Which civilian ship was torpedoed in 1940 while evacuating children from Britain to Canada, resulting in the deaths of 77 children? SS City of Benares. Which Pacific Island battle in 1944 saw Japanese forces retreat into underground tunnels, resulting in a 74-day campaign, despite the island being only 8 square miles? It was Peleliu. What was Operation Gunnerside? It was the Norwegian sabotage of Nazi heavy water production. The Laconia incident in 1942 led to what significant change in German naval warfare? Abandonment of the convoy system, implementation of wolfpack tactics, or Donit's order to stop rescuing surviving sunken ships? And it was that one, the order to stop rescuing survivors of sunken ships. Which battle was the largest tank engagement in history, involving approximately 8,000 tanks? Battle of Prokosovka. What was unique about the Soviet Night Witches? The 588th Night Bomber Regiment. They were exclusively female pilots. Who was the chief prosecutor for the United States at the Nuremberg trials? Robert Jackson, William Donovan, or Francis Biddle? Robert H. Jackson. Which British intelligence operation involved planting false documents on a corpse to mislead German intelligence about the Allied invasion of Sicily? Operation Bodyguard, Operation Minemeat, or Operation Fortitude? Operation Mincemeat. What was the Nero Decree issued by Hitler in March 1945? An order to destroy German infrastructure to prevent Allied use. The Great Stink operation during World War II involved what? Developing foul-smelling compounds to track German submarines. Which significant weapon system did the Allies capture intact at a place in 1945? It was W-2 rocket technology. Which country's forces were responsible for liberating the largest number of Nazi concentration camps? United States, United Kingdom, or Soviet Union? Soviet Union. The miracle of Dunkirk evacuation in 1940 used what unlikely vessel type in large numbers? Fishing boats, pleasure crafts, or hospital ships? Fishing boats. What was the Red Ball Express during World War II? A Soviet rapid deployment tank force, a truck convoy system, or a British bomber formation? A truck convoy system supplying Allied forces after D-Day. Which Nazi official attempted to negotiate peace with Allied throughout Sweden in 1943? Heinrich Himmler, Hermann Göring, or Heinrich Müller? Heinrich Müller. What was Operation Paperclip? US program to recruit German scientists, the Allied plan to assassinate Hitler, or the Soviet effort to capture Nazi documentation? The US program to recruit German scientists after the war. The Tripartite Pact of 1940 formally allied which three major Axis powers? Germany, Italy, and Romania, Germany, Japan, and Bulgaria, or Germany, Italy, and Japan? Germany, Italy, and Japan. What was the miracle of the Burn during World War II? The escape of 8,000 Danish Jews, the surrender of 20,000 German troops, or Switzerland's successful diplomatic efforts? Switzerland's successful diplomatic efforts to secure prisoners' exchanges. Which campaign saw Allied forces travel the farthest distance northward during the Pacific War? Which of these campaigns? Alarian Islands campaign. What was the primary purpose of the German-American bomber project? To photograph American military, to transport spies to the US, or to develop a bomber capable of striking the continental United States? To develop a bomber capable of striking the continental United States. Which British aircraft was designed specifically to carry the bouncing bomb used in the Dambusters raid? Avro Lancaster, Supermarine Spitfire, or de Havilland Mosquito? Avro Lancaster. What was the strategic importance of the Ploiești oil fields in Romania during World War II? They produced 35% of Germany's oil. They were the site of major prisoner war camps. They served as a main storage. They produced 35% of Germany's oil supply. What unusual tactic did the Soviet Union employ during the Battle of Moscow in 1941? Deploying camels, using air balloons, or recruiting children as frontline soldiers? deploying camels as pack animals. What was Unit 731? A Japanese biological and chemical warfare research facility, an elite German mountain warfare division, or a British code-breaking section? A Japanese biological and chemical warfare research facility. During which battle did German forces first encounter the Soviet T-34 tank, causing a significant tactical shock? Battle of Brody. Which small European country lost the highest percentage of its population during World War II? Poland, Yugoslavia, or Belarus? Belarus. What major Allied supplied route was nicknamed Burma Road? A naval convoy route through the Mediterranean, an Arctic shipping route, or a treacherous mountain highway? A treacherous mountain highway connecting India to China. What was the code name for the Allied plan to invade Japan's home islands? Operation Olympic, Operation Coroner, or Operation Typhoon? Operation Olympic. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising in 1943 lasted approximately how long against overwhelming German forces? 1 month. What was Operation Carthage? The bombing of Gestapo headquarters in Copenhagen, the destruction of Italian naval facilities, or the British commando raid in Saint-Nazaire? The bombing of Gestapo headquarters in Copenhagen. What Pacific Island battle saw Japanese forces use an extensive network of caves that were individually sealed by the Americans? Peleliu. What was the Venlo incident? The German kidnapping of 2 British intelligence officers, the assassination of a Dutch resistance leader, or the destruction of a key German ammunition deposit? The German kidnapping of 2 British intelligence officers. Why was the German battleship Tirpitz significant despite rarely engaging in combat? It tied up substantial Allied naval resources merely by existing. What was unique about the American 442nd Regimental Combat Team during World War II? It was led by Native American officers, it was composed almost entirely of Japanese, or it made up of prisoners. It was composed almost entirely of Japanese Americans. What was Operation Deadlight? The sculling of surrendered German U-boats after the war. Which small nation unexpectedly defeated Italian forces in the early stages of World War II, forcing Hitler to delay his invasion of the Soviet Union? Alabama, Greece, or Bulgaria? Greece. What was special about HMS X-Craft submarines during World War II? They were equipped with experimental sonar, they were miniature submarines, or they were constructed entirely from non-magnetic materials. They were miniature submarines used for special operations. Which World War II battle led to the highest number of casualties on a single day? D-Day, Normandy landings, Battle of Antietam, or Battle of Leyte Gulf? Battle of Leyte Gulf. What occurred during the German Attention T4 program? Mass euthanasia of disabled people, training of special forces troops, or deportation of Jews to ghettos? Mass euthanasia of disabled people. What was the principal tactic employed by Imperial Japanese Navy submarines during World War II? Wolfpack attacks, attacks on Allied warships rather than merchant vessels, or special operations? Attacks on Allied warships rather than merchant vessels. The first successful Allied amphibious landings in Europe during World War II took place in Sicily, Normandy, or Dieppe? Dieppe. What was Operation Bagration? The Allied bombing campaign against Romanian oil fields, the defense of Moscow, or the Soviet summer offensive in 1944? The Soviet summer offensive of 1944 that destroyed Army Group Center. What was unique about the Battle of Castle Litta in 1945? It was the highest altitude battle. It involved exclusively female combats, or American and Germans fought together against the USS. American and German fought together against the SS. Which experimental Allied weapon during World War II was known as the Great Panzer Drum? A submarine-launched cruise missile, a chemical warfare dispersal system, or a rocket-propelled explosive? A rocket-propelled explosive-laden wheel. What was the Jedburgh operation during World War II? The mass execution of civilians from London, the bombing of V2 rocket production facilities, or teams parachuted behind enemy lines? Teams parachuted behind enemy lines to organise. What was the main purpose of the German Enigma cipher machine? Encrypting diplomatic communications, coordinating troop movements, or encrypting military communications? Encrypting military communications. Which country changed sides during World War II? Bulgaria, Romania, or Italy? Italy. What was Operation Jericho? A precision bombing raid, the Allied invasion of southern France, or the airdrop of supplies to Warsaw? A precision bombing raid on American prisons to free resistance fighters. Which World War II naval battle was fought entirely by aircraft without the opposing ships ever seeing each other? The Battle of the Coral Sea. What was the primary purpose of the German V3 weapon? A multi-stage rocket for intercontinental strikes, a super long-range cannon to bombard London, or an early cruise missile? A super long-range cannon to bombard London. What was unique punishment did Nazi impose on relatives of would-be Hitler assassin Klaus von Stauffenberg? Arresting entire families. The Sukching massacre during World War II occurred in which occupied territory? Philippines, Hong Kong, or Singapore? Singapore. What was the Z Plan in World War II? Germany's naval construction program, Japan's defense of home islands, or Italy's invasion of North Africa? Germany's naval construction program. Which Allied force was tasked with hunting desert foxes in North Africa, not referring to Rummerl, but actual animals? Long Range Desert Group. What was the Ghost Army during World War II? A tactical deception unit, special forces operating behind Japanese lines, or German units that refused to surrender after the war? Admiral Osami Nagano. Operation Downfall was the planned Allied invasion of the Japanese home islands, northern Italy, or mainland China. Japanese home islands. Which significant military force did the Polish government in exile maintain throughout the war? Polish II Corps, Polish Home Army, or Polish Resist Adorned Divisions? Polish II Corps. What was the Gliswitz incident? A false flag operation, the assassination of a German diplomat, or the destruction of strategic German railway? The false flag operation staged by Germany as a pretext. Which Soviet operation in 1944 involved the complete destruction of 30 German divisions, larger than the defeat of Stalingrad? Operation Bagration. What was unique about the German Mistral composite aircraft? It could take off and land vertically, it combined a fighter with an explosive-filled bomber, or it was the first successful jet-powered bomber? It combined a fighter with an explosive-filled bomber. What was Operation Keelhaul? The hunting of German submarines in the Atlantic, the rescue of POWs from Japanese camps, or the forced repatriation of Soviet citizens? The forced repatriation of Soviet citizens from Allied-controlled areas. The Maui Battalion was a distinguished military unit from which country? Australia, New Zealand, or Canada? New Zealand. What was the significance of the Phony War? The Soviet disinformation campaign, an 8-month period of limited military operations, or the diplomatic standoff before Pearl Harbor? An 8-month period of limited military operations in Western Europe. What was the primary strategic objective of Operation Hailstone in 1944? To destroy the Japanese naval base at Truk Lagoon. Which unusual material was used to construct an experimental aircraft carrier during World War II? Ice reinforced with wood pulp, compressed rubber, or aluminium foam? Ice reinforced with wood pulp. What was the fallacy pocket? A special document pouch used by Allied spies, a concealed submarine base in Norway, or an encirclement where thousands of German troops were trapped? An encirclement where thousands of German troops were trapped. Which Japanese aircraft was modified to drop an atomic bomb but never used for that purpose? Nakajami G5N Liz. What was Operation Bernhard? A Nazi plan to destabilise the British economy, the German attempt to capture the Suez Canal, or the rescue of Mussolini? A Nazi plan to destabilise the British economy with counterfeit currency. Which unusual naval vessel did the British use to decoy German bombers away from convoys? Q ships, cam ships, or fighter catapult ships? Fighter catapult ships. What was special about the American Ghost Division? It consisted of soldiers with psychic abilities. It specialised in tactical deception. It operated exclusively at night. It specialised in tactical deception operations. It operated exclusively at night. Okay, moving on to question 76. Which critical World War II battle was won partly due to the tactical error known as the Miracle of Kalachin Gol, the successful defense of the Malta Soviet-Japanese border battle? Soviet-Japanese border battle that influenced Japan's decision to strike south. What unique strategy did the Soviet employ during Operation Bagration that significantly contributed to its success? Military deception on an unprecedented scale. What was the code of Bushido's effect on Japanese behaviour during World War II? It mandated that officers lead from the rear. It required Japanese soldiers to treat prisoners humanly. It elevated surrender. It elevated surrender as dishonourable, leading to few Japanese prisoners of war. What unusual material shortage affected the German military significantly during World War II? Rubber, copper, or timber? Rubber. What was unique about the Black Eagles during World War II? They were Mexican fighter pilots, they were the only African American bomber squadron, or they flew captured German aircraft against Luftwaffe. They were Mexican fighter pilots who fought in the Pacific. Which major World War II event occurred partially due to a weather forecast? Attack on Pearl Harbor, D-Day invasion, or Operation Barbarossa? D-Day invasion. What happened to most of the Polish officers captured by the Soviets in 1939? They were transferred to German custody, they were executed, or they were sent to labour camps. They were executed in the Kirin massacre. What was the shark persecution? The Allied hunting of Japanese midget submarines, the systematic destruction of German U-boats, or the period when German U-boat encryption became more complex? The period when German U-boat encryption became more complex. Which aircraft held the distinction of being both the first German jet fighter and the first jet aircraft used in combat? The Messerschmitt Me-262. What was Operation Lustra? The Japanese invasion of the Philippines, the British expedition to Greece, or the Allied invasion of Sicily? The British expedition to Greece in 1941. What was the primary purpose of the American HARP project during World War II? A prototype helicopter, a high-altitude research project, or a hospital ship? A high-altitude research project for meteorological data. Which distinctive American aircraft had a twin-boom design and was nicknamed the Fork-tailed Devil by German pilots? P-38 Lightning. What made Operation Pistorius significant in World War II history? It established the first military satellite. It was the first successful airborne. It was a failed German sabotage mission. It was a failed German sabotage mission on American soil. What was the strategic purpose of the Doolittle raid on Tokyo in 1942? To destroy key Japanese industrial facilities, to test the range capabilities, or to boost American morale? To boost American morale after Pearl Harbor. What was the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot? The bombing of Japanese supply ships, the systematic hunting of Japanese, or one-sided aerial battle? A one-sided aerial battle in which Japanese lost hundreds of aircraft. What unique battle distinction separates the Battle of Savo Island from other World War II naval engagements? It was the worst naval defeat in US history. What unique piece of military equipment did the Soviets use that employed dry ice to cool machine guns? The Aerosan. What was significant about the German Fritz X weapon? It was the first guided bomb, it was the first chemical warfare, or it was a human-guided torpedo? It was the first guided bomb used in combat. What was the Schichlendist, SD, I'll just say SD, during World War II? All these exciting exotic German names. The intelligence agency of the SS. What was uniquely significant about the German submarine U-234 in 1945? It was transporting uranium oxide to Japan when it surrendered. What was the primary function of Window, codenamed Chaff by Americans during Allied bombing raids? Radar jamming using strips of aluminium foil. What was Operation Crossbow? The development of proximity fuses for anti-aircraft shells, the Allied campaign against V weapons, or the German program to develop surface-to-air missiles? The Allied campaign against V weapon sites. What was the Kangaroo Court that oversaw the execution of Germans who participated in the 20th of July plot against Hitler? It was a people's court. What was significant about the HMS Graf during World War II? It pioneered underwater sound detection, it was the first nuclear-powered submarine, or it was a captured German U-boat. It was a captured German U-boat used by the Royal Navy. And your last one, what was Operation Drumbeat? The Japanese naval assault, the Allied bombing campaign, or a German U-boat offensive along the US? The German U-boat offensive along the US East Coast. So, how did you do today? Drop your score in the comments below and, of course, like and subscribe so you get notified every time we post a new quiz. And join us next time on Quiz Time.